Genesis, so that we read it from.
Talking about the greatest scientist, at least during Benjamin Banneker's time, created in America, or born in America, I should say, of American citizenship, whatever. Let's talk about Benjamin Banneker as the greatest scientist.
Yes, this should be a great topic of all our people, because we're at that time of prophecy when there is to be a new universal cycle, when everything comes into alignment. What does that mean? To understand Benjamin Banneker, who was of Dogon DNA and ancestry, what does this alignment means to the universe, to planet Earth, and the people on it? It means that we're at the position of time when the head was created, with the creation of the head. Mm-hmm. And the creation of head, and after this creation of head, then came that second nature, or we may say of frequencies, that we'll just use the word FM. And these FM frequencies together created the nature of this part of creation. The head, the minds, the two halves, the head, in the image of the great force where thought was materialized and manifested into reality. That is the creative head. That's that energy, that FM. Mm-hmm. But in order to understand and know the FM frequencies, and each frequency resulted in a thought made real and a deed, the opposite would have to come into being. The opposite have to come into being in order for us to understand and know in the proper perspective what that head image is, that nature. So its opposite nature had to be created, which is the nature of the animal. Of all the animals, which animals would you select for that nature to represent nature? The king of the animal world, the king of the beasts, the mighty lion was the animal, was the body that was selected to represent the nature of the animal kingdom, of its existence on planet Earth. And we can call that nature of existence of the animals like an AM band. And we can link it to today's radio, where there is two bands of existence. You have an AM and an FM. You can turn and see a number on both, opposite each other. You turn to that number, but until you switch the AM switch in that position, you cannot hear any AM. It come into existence. In other words, the generator is in tune with the receiver only when those two bands are in sync, or in alignment. You go to the FM, there is no completeness of the FM until it's in sync, till the receiver is in sync with the FM transmitter. The receiver and generator, a transmitter, must be in synchronization on the same band, even though simultaneously every station is being broadcast in the AM band, but you can't bring it up because that AM band is a separate band, is a lower band of the FM frequency, which is a higher band. So when you put that receiver in, it's in tune with that generator of that frequency of that proper band. Everything is in alignment. Everything is in synchronization. Thus, you get the energy from the FM. This is also linked to creation. It is part of creation. That is the head, the FM. It receives that. And that's the nature of those different bands or those different attributes. Love, understanding, forgiveness, what have you. All of those On the lower AM band, we have its frequencies that's represented by various deeds or attributes. Hate, impatience, intolerance, abuse, rape. All of these are actions of deeds that is made real by the thought in the mind generating that frequency. But when the mind is linked and it's put into action, that frequency then becomes part of your nature. You're building up your nature. And every time you repeat that same frequency, generating that same deed, you're generating that bandwidth of that frequency becoming part of your nature. So if you live with a band of thieves and you're doing thieves actions, you're building up your nature to be the nature of thieves. If from your mind you generate the frequency of love and you're in the company of love, generating that frequency, and you're generating it every day, then your nature becomes what that pattern becomes a part of. That's your nature. Love then is a part of your nature. So we need one to understand the other. One cannot exist without the other. No coin can exist with one side. Take a dollar bill, take all the ink off of it, and try and present it as legal tender. You can't, because it takes two sides to make a dollar bill. It takes two sides to make a coin. Creation was a duality. Night and day. Everything is not just day. Everything is not just night. There's two opposite, night and day. Creation is a duality. Our mind is just not one. Our mind is two complete minds. Each half is complete in its function, but it takes the two halves to make the mind. Without the two halves in synchronization and functioning, we do not have the proper working of the mind. So we can't eliminate the dual. We know it's an integral part. So the mind and its attributes over the body. We must understand that when we're looking at America. We're looking at America. America, as we know it, the United States of America, or the Constitution of America. That America was not the beginning of democracy. There was a democracy laws that was written prior to the Europeans being the creator of the constant, of its heroes of that Constitution. Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, Adams, so forth and so on, are heroes of that Constitution. But that was not the first Constitution. Again, that Constitution that became the Democratic Constitution was written after the model of the Iroquois Constitution that had been created earlier. And that was penned by Thomas Paine. And Jefferson and Hamilton took the Constitution written by Paine, who was an atheist, they say, and they took out amendments, took out parts of it. What they took out, they later had to put back in that he had in the original document, the amendments to give all people equal rights. That was in the original. That was delivered to Jefferson by Tom Paine. But that wasn't the origin. That wasn't the big origin of democratic or a new way of thinking or a new form of administration of the people in this part of the world that we call America, or the colonies at that time, that later grew to be the current states of America based on that Constitution. For 8 years prior to that, there was another document by a group of people who were heroes for that short period of time that brought about freedom to this land. But they're not heroes that we see when we visit Washington. We only see the heroes that rose from that constitutional time. But there were heroes prior to that. For example, one of the great heroes was General Washington. How did he become a general? Who made this farmer a general? A general of what? A general of the army. Well, who then authorized and had the authority to create an army to make him general of? It was the legal body that they called the Continental Congress. And they created a continental army, and they appointed General Farmer, Plantation, Slave Owner Washington, who was a noble man at heart, who wanted to be king of this country, and made him general of the armies to bring what? Freedom to this land, to the colonies, so that they would not be taxed without representation under the Queen thousands of miles away. There are a group of people in leadership and the key people who said, we have been free all of our lives. Our history is free. We don't want to become under a Queen of England that we're going to pay taxes to. They were large, successful farmers and landowners who did not want to be taxed without representation, who wanted to remain what they knew is the best form of government, one on freedom. So they had people educating those early colonists who could not read, could not write, who knew nothing of freedom. They had been subjects under the Queen all their life, and they accepted being in servitude and paying off their debt. And they accepted that with pride. They accepted that. They knew nothing about the cry for freedom. They could not pen. They couldn't read or write. There was no schools in their homeland, England. The people who could read and write was the nobles in that hierarchy or middle, high class, the doctors and what have you, that supported the royal family and their courts. But under them was the serfs, the common people. They were landless, but they didn't cry for freedom because they knew nothing about freedom or owning land. They were the subject of the king. And the land that they're on, they was under a landlord, the lords of the land. That was a system they knew, and they didn't rebel about it. In France, they rebelled, not because of land, but because they're hungry. They knocked on the gates, and the queen said, ha ha, they're hungry, ha 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 ha. We're having a party, we'll let them eat cake. But they beheaded her. When the French had their revolution, she was their care, her head was their cake. But the cry of freedom did not come about, and the revelation did not start in England and Europe. It started more in France. In other words, the English was content with serving their queen. So where did this cry for freedom, where did this education of these people who were earlier just indentured servants come to learn about freedom and to become patriots in an ideology of freedom and democracy? Who was teaching them? Where was this education coming from? Who had formed together and created the Continental Congress to bring freedom and democracy to these colonists? Where did it happen? One of the organizers and teachers of freedom was an African named Christopher Addicks. And he was the first one killed. He was targeted for agitating the previously content Europeans, Englishmen. So This was the human dynamics of creating the body that created the Continental Congress, that created the Continental Army, that appointed George Washington. They appointed him as the Continental Congress without a president, because it was just an early thing. But he was appointed General of the Continental Army. And the Continental Army had black and white troops, African and white troops, not just a few African troops. In the Bible, we says in a letter, in a diary of one of the soldiers concerning his fiancée. And this is a Bible. Why is it my Bible? Because it's a book of many books. This is a book of many books, of many authors. This is a book of many books, of many authors. It's condensed of many. So we have two books of many books condensed by many authors. One we call the Holy Bible, King James Version, of all of these separate books.
Can you deal with that, since you got it, in terms of its truthfulness, and yet just to propose that with the Sphinx, the African story from which that came, but we need, you talked about Moses and you talked about Abraham,
we can,
and you saw that they didn't exist.
We can talk about three classifications of books. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the first classification of books that has been hidden from knowledge and from the psyche of the descendants of these people who brought about the first philosophy of an administrative order based on spiritual images of the Creator, the head, again, that brought about 42 laws that they lived by to create, to be the base of their civilization. And these laws directed their interaction between one another and other people. And there's a whole series, this classification of books. And they had a written Bible, if you want to call it a Bible, but they had a written book that gave them the rules, what they should not do, so that they can stand up before any man and say, I have not, I have not, I have not, 42 times in the building of their character on this physical earth, while it builds up their soul that was going to journey after death.
Some of those 42.
Well, some of those 42 are the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments was taken from those 42 to be the laws of people who had no spiritual base. And that was the source of the 10 Commandments. The 42. So everything in the 10 Commandments was there. But in the 10 Commandments it says, thou shalt not commit adultery. In the original 42 it says, I have not slept with another man's wife. I have not. I have not. So here we're saying a person that must say and live a life where I have not slept with another man's wife. But here we have some laws where it says, you shall not sleep with another man's wife. That excluded the person giving that, saying, I. So the carriers of this law not only slept with other men's wives, but they brought about a law of lust, where they would sleep with every slave woman under them. She would have to get up out of her bed from her man to go to service the master. He didn't care. There was no such thing. His lust. But he can pass this law to his slaves that thou shalt not commit adultery. But he was sleeping with every woman on his plantation that he owned. She had to service them. But yet, every Sunday, he would sit and teach to his slaves that they should not commit adultery. Thou should not commit adultery. And after service, he'd go and sleep with another slave woman. But he'd tell them every Sunday, thou should not. So we have the origin of those 10 commandments that was given by Moses, that became the basis of laws of Jesus of Nazareth, and then the creation of the New Testament. And the creation of the New Testament then replaced the Old Testament with many Christians, because they said the Old Testament was of an old time and dealt with the Hebrews, or the book of Torah that came into existence. So we could put the book of Torah and make 4 books. But all of those books came from these writings. All the books after it came from these writings. To the Quran, its source, the Quran's source of validation is the Bible, this book. And this book came from this book. So all of them, the Torah and all these books, came from this book, including this book of many books. It keeps alive, and it refers to the human dynamics of this first book as it relates to us today. So therefore, this well-read book, along with this well-read book, I can carry in my knowledge of understanding that I can base my current actions on, while I develop my soul and my body based on my knowledge of this book. But I don't carry it with me, because in the event I want to pass this information on to my brothers and sisters who have been misled by the Torah or all the other books, in violation of the writings of our own writings, I carry it so that we can use this as a point of discussion, because this is all they know. They only know this. Then I can somewhat talk about this in the modern. So
that Holy Bible, no, I'm talking about the Bible. Yeah, they both are holy books. But in terms of the King James Version, the Bible written by Europeans, whether it's the Bible from the Catholic Church, they are misleading to African people. European images, everything reflected through the culture of the European are projected in such a way that black people will feel that God was a European, and in fact they worship the European. And because of that Bible, and it is black ministers that reinforce that every week.
Yes, and they're mentioning here as the preachers that is going down with the devil. The word the devil. And they will be destroyed when the truth, when the time of the new beginning will be the truth, rights and justice, which is the laws and principles of MAAT, which is the basis of this. So the laws of MAAT that was expanded by the 2 components from Imhotep, love and peace, created. This was the base of the civilizations we call the Sphinx civilization, that was the basis of the Comedian civilization, was the evolution of the laws of MAAT and the laws and life of Imhotep. But by this being absence in the training of our people, whose mind and their condition and perception was shaped by this while they're in a state of terror, their mental terror, the PTSD state of them, that status then, and they were not seated in the laws of MAAT. Unfortunately, it hadn't touched all of our people. So there was no unity. They could not withstand the onslaught of the people of the animal nature, who was operating on that animal nature, constantly warred. And we have, especially now over the past 2,000 years, to where it has become forgotten. And the rise of this has replaced the religion of this book, has replaced the spiritual existence of the first book, the origin. But now we're becoming enlightened. We have many ex-preachers and reverends and of church of this book having visited their homeland during the summer by the hundreds of thousands. And tours will be going again come spring, taking new groups, second and third visits of the old groups, back to this origin, the origin of the 42 laws of our civilization, of MAAT, that has now caused many churches to switch from the religion of this to the principles of MAAT. And we find the MAAT centers has grown tremendously. We find now ex-preachers who are no longer teaching in this, who have switched over to the MAAT principles. They are replaced, and we have yet a growing number of our people being subject to this, moving away from MAAT, especially in the land of Al-Kibalan, or what we call Africa. Their mental modification have made them a prime source of immigrating and bringing them into this country to integrate into that religion of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. So if he existed or not is not the point. His 10 Commandments was taken from the civilization of Kemet. Many of Islam, its Psalms are written and recorded in the pyramids. In the Sphinx civilization, we find the spirituality of the mind being in tune with the Creator. And that's what it means. They fail to understand creation. In Genesis 2, in Genesis 2:27, let me read. So God created man in his own image. In his own image, in the image of God. In the image of God created he, him, male and female. He created them. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Their nature then was what? The image of God. God's nature. God's attributes. The mentality. The head then shall be over all the animals. And they were blessed at that point because they were the children of God. Thus, the children are nothing but a reflection of the parents. Mother God. They came from Mother God as the children bring forth those future generations, bring forth the grand and great-grand images of the Creator, whose attributes would bring pleasure to the Mother, Father, Creator. So we're talking about the Trinity of creation, the mother, the father, and the children. That is Genesis 1:27. In his own image. No one, the nature had nothing to do with the soil, had nothing to do with the environment that was created for the animals. The environment of the earth was created for the animal nature that would exist. But we find in Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And he was not blessed. He was not blessed. So we have another man whose nature was the nature of the dust in the ground. This is where the Geraldic people went into that environment. And they were shaped by that. They were environmentally shaped. Because God had already created the nature of the dust and ground for the animals. And they went and became part of that. They became part of the environment that God had already created. And the Lord formed man of the dust and ground. He formed the nature of the animals, of the dust and ground. Formed man of the dust and ground. That's the nature. The dust and ground is the nature of the earth. The environment of the earth. Mm-hmm. And this is what the Geraldic people became. And they became the Europeans of today, whose nature had been shaped of the dust and the ground as the animals. And this is where we find the difference between what we call today the difference between the sun people and the ice people. And those two natures of man are not integratable. You cannot integrate those two opposite natures. There is no integration of those two opposite. You can't integrate the two. One must become the other. The nature must change. So it's not integration that we have. Being able to live in peace with who you are. All people must be able to live in peace and harmony. You're right, again, in selecting Benjamin Banneker, because this is that point in time, as given evidence in the prophecies that's written in our early books of the cycle when everything will be made new. That is verified in the prophecies here. I will make all things new. In Revelations, sometimes it's good to read directly. It's not me that's saying this. I'm not saying this at all. I'm only reading and telling you what has been written in the Holy Book. In Revelations chapter 21, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. That is the 25,000 year cycle is written in the early book. And at that time, there is a new earth and a new heaven. And the old cycle passed away. It's divided into two cycles. One cycle is a feminine cycle or positive cycle. The last half cycle is a male cycle of the energies of the male and female. And that happens every 26,000 years. there is a new heaven and a new earth. That particular cycle, everything comes and is alignment. So there is key then that your head, what's in your head, is in alignment with this new beginning in this new time when all things are to be made new and the present things become former things. As it relates to us today, as it relates to the occupation of Wall Street, occupiers of Wall Street, as it relates to what's happening into our intercities, where the communities, the neighborhoods of the Afro-Americans have become the major poverty centers in America. All of those things are to be passed as former things. So the human dynamics that have created those will pass away. So therefore, all things must be made new. So we need a new thinking. A new thinking, then, where our head and our creative abilities is now over. It's the alignment where the head is to become over the animal nature. Not to be integrated, it must be over. The animal nature will always be the animal nature. That nature over the past 400 or 500 years have brought world slavery, world wars, have polluted the earth with blood. The earth, Mother Earth, has been polluted with blood under that nature, that war, survival nature. You must fight everything. I have a cold. We must fight the cold. We must fight cancer. We must fight this. We must fight that. That is from, fight is a symbol of their way of living. That nature, when you're living that, we must fight the ability of natural foods to be presented to man. Everything is to fight and to change under that nature. The new beginning is back at that new cycle where the head, the creative, is over the body. It is appropriate at this particular time that Sphinx become the symbol of the new as it was then at the old cycle. So we're coming into tune, we're coming in alignment, and as an example of why it's important that we know, so we can understand the deeds of that animal nature. And let's go back to the Civil War to look at what that nature will do. And we can look at the period or the battle of Newmarket Heights and the diary that was made by Sergeant Sherwood in Newmarket Heights, or Fleetwood, in the taking of the Newmarket Heights. And he was on furlough, Christmas Eve, and he was getting ready to go back. He had been fighting in the war, but he and all black troops who were ready to fight was told to wait. Lincoln said, I cannot order them into service because we're losing the war. Generals. And he put another general in charge to bring about a change, General Ulysses Grant, because the generals previous to him was losing the war. And he said, generals, you must get me a victory before I can allow the colored troops in. They're waiting.
Why?
Because history will say they won the war. We had to bring them in and they won the war. Bring me a battle, win me one battle so we can say we brought them in to mop up, or they only assist.
They had to win one battle.
One battle. Lincoln told his generals, General, win me one battle, just one battle, so that I can say the war, the tide is turned and we're winning and they're on the run. And we will now let in the colored troops to come in to mop up to help us pop up.
But what was the truth?
The truth was they did win one battle, and then the troops, colored troops, were called in. The truth is the war was virtually lost, and that was the complaint. And then when the colored troops were brought in, they then started winning the battles that had been lost by the white Union troops. One great battle that they had tried on 2 previous occasions, they had to win the route into Richmond. And that was controlled by a hill that was called, an area that was called the New Market, the New Market battle. And the battle.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, the Battle of New Market Heights in Virginia was a famous battle that the colored troops would get credit of mopping up. Well, the New Market Heights battle was a strategic hill that the Confederate had under control that they could not take. So after this one battle was won by the North, the Union soldiers, they brought in the troops, and the troops then had fought a number of battles leading up to this. One of the persons was a Sergeant Fleetwood, who was on leave, had a few days to spend with his parents, and he was saying goodbye. And his beautiful fiancée, reading from the Journey of the Shanghai People Bible, which is a book of many books, like the Bible, that is bringing truth to its readers. We have the sergeant saying goodbye. His beautiful fiancée tearfully asked him, "Why do you have to go back? You have fought in numerous battles. Anyway, America will forget what we're doing, like they have forgotten the thousands of black soldiers who helped win freedom in the Revolutionary War." There's another perception that blacks, the Revolutionary War, we have the perception of Paul Revere, we have a perception of General Washington crossing the Potomac in a boat, and there was just a black soldier that untied the rope from there. And there's a perception of that. The reality was, and I'll quote, thousands of black soldiers who helped win freedom in the Revolutionary War, like they have forgotten the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, where General Andrew Jackson praised black troops for saving America's honor. "You and I are not in slavery. We're free." Sergeant Fleetwood replied, "But you and I are not free." Reminds me of what the first president of Ghana said. "Ghanaians, we're not free until all of Africa is free. And we must unite." But this is what he answered to his beautiful fiancée. "But you and I are not free. No black is free from the contempt and loathing of his fellow man. I can see the way we're looked at, the hatred. I go to fight to win respect and honor of all black people, not just the blasting off the chains of slavery of millions of our people. I shall fight to win respect and honor for us and our children and our children's children. Will you wait for me? Will you marry me when I return? Till death do us part. Let us not say goodbye just say till we meet again. And he went back to fight. But then there came a battle cry. And that battle cry really became prominent in the Battle of the New Market Heights. And what makes this battle, which is typical of many battles, was after the two white divisions on two occasions failed to take the hill, and they called in the colored troops, they decided to give the colored troops to fight the well-positioned Confederate troops with cannon and rifle. Black troops were given rifles with no caps, no bullets, only bayonets. Their will to win for us, their descendants, was so great that they took the hill, but with great loss of life.
Now, you said something about they had no bullets.
They had no bullets. So,
why? Talk about that. Yeah, how you doing?
Because two white divisions on two occasions had failed to win the hill. They were defeated. So how can some colored troops win the hill? To issue them bullets would be a waste of bullets. And money was short. So give them rifle and bayonet with no bullets to take a hill that two divisions on two occasions of white troops with bullets could not take the hill. So the 4,000 colored troops with no bullets was gathered and prepared to take the New Market Heights hill. But they had a battle cry. The battle cry was Fort Pillow. Earlier I had said Fort Love. It was actually Fort Pillow. And Fort Pillow was the battle cry of some other battles. What happened is, April 12th in 1864, a small fort, and it was Fort Pillow, there was a garrison by a small contingent of African American troops, a small contingent, and they were overrun by a tremendous superior force of rebel troops. The Union force surrendered that evening after an intense, vigorous, but hopeless fight. The rebels were led by Lieutenant General Nathan Bedford Force. Earlier I had made the statement he was Colonel Force. He had become a Lieutenant General. He was no longer Colonel. He later became the creator of the infamous Ku Klux Klans in a Southern Baptist church. General Forster's men rounded up all the people at Fort Pillow, the women, the few the soldiers that was left. All told was 300 soldiers, women, and children. After they surrendered, they put them in a church, locked the doors and windows, and set the church afire and burned them alive. That was Fort Pillow. And African American troops entered all battles with the cry, "Remember Fort Pillow." From that point on, they were an inspired army in many battles. And their cry, "Remember Fort Pillow." And Lawrence Dunbar memorized the massacre in his famed poem, "The Colored Troops." And at Fort Pillow, God have mercy on the deeds. It was 2 months later that Fleetwood's 4th Brigade shouted, "Remember Fort Pillow," along with 3 black regiments that they took to battle at the New Market Heights. They went on, and they would not allow the flag to touch the ground. When one of the colored troops was carrying the banner, the proud flag, if he were shot, before he fell in the flag to touch the ground, a colored soldier would pick it up and cry, "Remember Fort Pillow." And they ran up that hill over their own bodies, the men, and reached the top, and with bayonets only, fought back a holding line. And when the whites looking down and hearing that eerie scream, "Remember Fort Pillow," and the determination in their eyes coming against cannon and ball fire, took the hill with bayonets only, and routed and opened up the pathway to attack Richmond. Richmond was attacked, and it was the colored soldiers who ran Lee. Lee ran, and his troops ran from them and surrendered to the colored troops, which is the end of the Civil War. Remember Fort Pillow. Battle cry, they needed no bullets because they were fighting for the dignity and freedom of their people. From the diary of Sergeant Fleetwood. It clearly, the truth of the history of this country did not start with the Constitution. It really didn't start with the English introduction of the Atlantic slave trade that they officially end in May of 207 when the Queen of England visited Jamestown and officially announced the end of the 400-year slave trade that closed the prophecy of Genesis 15, 13, and 14. Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 and 14. After 400 years of slavery and oppression, also of that period and of that time of revelation, and destroying the symbol of that slave trade. The great merchants who got rich on trading, not only gold and silver and all manner of things, but slaves and the souls of men. And that city of that great symbol, Babylon, the city of sin, the city of horror, New York City, that symbol would be destroyed. And from afar, they'd look at the smoke burning and see the end of that symbol of world trade merchants who had become respected men based on the slaves and the souls of men. That's in Revelation 18. Read the whole Revelations, the prophecy on what would happen in 18. And it did happen. 911. People stood afar and saw the smoke from that city, that sin city. Revelations was fulfilled. 911. Who? All I can say, we know that Revelations was fulfilled. The prophecy was fulfilled on those merchants of slaves and the souls of men. And the 400-year end of that period did happen as prophesied when the Queen of England came in May of 207. And in prophecy there would be 3 woes to that nation would happen. The first woe around her neck that she still has, the Iraq War, the Iraq and Afghanistan war that started as a great war. America running out of water to drink. Without water there can be no agriculture. Running out of water is a woe, a terrible woe about any human or living thing. Without water our plants cannot survive. Without water we cannot survive. And they had to admit, towns in Tennessee, the water was non-existent. Town well was completely dry. Water was rationing. City, area after area. They could not hide the water crisis anymore. Then the whole world went bankrupt. And President Bush announced to the world another woe around the neck of America. Its financial system had brought about the bankruptcy of the world financial institution. And just yesterday, France financial status was taken away. It's no longer a high rating, bringing another negative component to the euro, the world financing, the woe of the 2,000-year march of the Gentile was bankrupt. This country is yet to face another downturn in the economy based on that bankruptcy. And the president we have today was put into election that was awaited by the whole world to bring about change from that 2007 bankruptcy. People were suddenly out of work who thought they had a beautiful future and was crying for change, integrity in the government. And governments then had to change. One country, women with a rose marched on the government, and the government left office. People in Greece rioted because of the IMF policies of the bankruptcy. Italy, Spain, the whole world had to go and create bailout plans, stimulus money, to falsely keep up the world system that had went bankrupt. This country, President Bush, put in billions of dollars as a stimulus plan.
You mean President
Bush.
Oh,
President Bush put in the first $500 million. Obama came in as president on change, bringing integrity to the government. Of the Wall Street greed, the CEO's industry needed integrity. This was the cry. And we find the election of that year, of 2008, it was a cry, an election for change. And November 7th, the 307th day of the year, which is related to Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7. The 307th day of the year is Jeremiah 3:07. And that 307th day of the year, we find that November the 2nd, or the second chapter of Jeremiah 30, was the glorious day. The beginning that would happen on the events of the third chapter, of the third verse. Well, what happened? The third verse relates to November the 3rd. Well, what human events in the world that would cause the world to be dancing in the street, to be a day of Thanksgiving? November the 3rd was the results of the election November the 2nd. November the 2nd was the incident that would bring about the removal of the chain and the bonds around the people's neck. All of the prophecies then was fulfilled. The bonds and chains would be removed from the neck of who? Of the indigenous people of Alkebulan, whose chain and bonds was put on their neck when the 1865 slave system ended in America and brought depression into Europe. They had to concentrate on taking the resources and moving in Africa to end their depression that happened when they could no longer build slave ships. They could no longer build chains and irons for the slaves. There was no longer slave products coming into Europe. All of the sailors, the makers of the ships and of the chains, were suddenly unemployed. And they looked to Africa, so they came into the continent to replace that human resources, that human wealth from that human slave system had to be replaced. And the onslaught from Egypt to Cairo, and they start fighting over the spoil of Africa. And they had a conference in November 1864. They had to end this. They could not fight among themselves and then fight among the tremendous resistance that they were meeting. Even though they had an ally, the Muslims coming out of the north to tear apart the continent. Yet the brave soldiers, and many of them led by great women, the two generals in Mauritania, the female general in Angola, the female general in northern Nigeria, was fighting, was leading the fight against slavery in their continent. When the men did not rise up, the women rose up and took over the army in the battle and were defeating the Islamics and the Christians that was hemming them in. And they met in Berlin to solve that problem. And out of that meeting came the 1885 Berlin Act. They stopped fighting among themselves, and based on their effective occupation, that was their land, because they had been legally classified. The inhabited indigenous people were legally classified as animals, and animals cannot claim land. Thus, according to the 1885 Berlin Act, the land